All right. Hey, welcome to a special Monday edition of Lunch with Lincoln. I am Reed Galen, your host for today, and I'm also on the road. So this is our first remote Lunch with Lincoln. I am here in beautiful downtown Austin, Texas. So hook 'em horns to all you Longhorns out there. I am very, very pleased and flattered to be joined by Representative Julie Johnson. She represents House District 115 in the Texas House of Representatives, which represents a big chunk of Northwest Dallas County, including a slice of Dallas City, Farmers Branch, Carrollton, among other places. So, Representative, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, thank you so much. Welcome to Texas.
No, listen, it's welcome back. I was here many, many moons ago, and glad to be back. I think I could get my family here, but for the face of sun nature of summer in Austin. So we'll be here to visit. But listen, obviously, Representative, I know you've got only a little bit of time. There's a lot going on at the Texas State Capitol right now. So just to give everybody a recap. So for everybody that doesn't know, the Texas legislature is unique. It only meets about 5 or 6 months out of every 2 years. So it's a biennial legislature. The other 18 months, Representative Johnson and every other member of the Texas House of Representatives, the Texas State Senate, have other jobs. They have careers that they have to go do because, as the representative can tell you, the pay is not what you'd call a living wage.
No.
But this year, and it's in the odd years, so 2021 was a legislative session. Earlier this year, at the very end of the legislative session, Republicans in the State House and in the State Senate, led by efforts from the Speaker and Governor Greg Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, attempted to pass voting, very restrictive voting legislation. Representative Johnson and other Democrats refused to take part in that. They left the proceedings. And in Texas, in the Texas legislature, you have to have a quorum of members in order to proceed with legislation. Their actions in that regard killed this piece of legislation. Governor Greg Abbott called a special session of the legislature specifically to bring these types of voting restrictions back up. SB 1, I believe, Representative, and House Bill 3, I believe, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, are now up for debate. There was all weekend long, there was staff hearings and committee hearings ran through the night, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And now, as I understand it, these bills are going to come to the House of the legislature today. So aside from joining us, can you give us an update on where we are with these bills?
Well, Reed, thank you. So the governor called a special session, like you indicated, and we adjourned. We convened on Thursday, rather, and the session officially started. He appointed a special select committee to hear the election bill, and they started their hearing on Saturday, and so got to work right away. And over 460 people came to testify for that bill, and it was crazy. It went all night long, 24 hours. Lots of concerns about provisions of the bill. Lots of Democrats offered committee amendments to the bill. Each one of those amendments failed on party lines. And then the chairman of the committee voted it out of the committee on a purely partisan line vote of 9-5. And then I presume it's going to be called to the House floor when we reconvene tomorrow at 10 a.m.
And so, just Representative, so I'm clear, the Republican chair of the committee voted the bill out of committee on a party line vote on a committee in which they have a 4-seat advantage.
That's correct.
In membership. Okay, gang, I just want to remember that as you hear other Republicans in other forums talking about how it's unfair that there are less Republicans on specific select committees. So, Representative Johnson, for the folks out there, can you give us a sense of what this bill would do if it's passed and enacted in the state of Texas?
Sure. I'm going to back up just a smidge and talk about kind of the history of where this bill has come from. So, we had the bill in the regular legislative session, as you indicated in your opening remarks, and there were some terrible, terrible provisions there relating to souls for the polls, relating to the ability to overturn an election, in particular without having to prove evidence of voter fraud. And those were some of the key objections that we were really concerned about at the end of the session that caused our walkout. Well, what happened then is a lot of media attention came to Texas, came to highlight the voter bill, and the Republicans really had no ability to justify those terrible provisions and why they were in our election proposals. And so now they have filed a new bill. We just got the bill filed on Friday, I believe, and then they set the hearings for Saturday. And so we are really, tearing apart this bill and they took out the election overturning provisions. They took out souls to the polls, but they added some voter purge information and some provisions that will allow, especially in the Senate bill, that will make it easy for election officers to kick people who are validly registered to vote off the roll, if they haven't voted frequently enough. And so we're very concerned about that. We're very concerned about it. It opens the door for poll watchers to really and literally harass voters. And so just think about that. And that can go either way. But if you are very concerned and very passionate, a poll watcher, it really empowers poll watchers to be involved in every aspect of the election process. There can't be distance requirements. The election judge has been severely limited in their ability to remove a disruptive poll watcher from the poll. In fact, they almost kind of get 3 strikes before they're out. And so this is not baseball. This is right. Everyone's opportunity to vote. So what about those 3 voters or those 3 instances that they get hall passes on before they're kicked out of the polls? Voter mobile voting they're really making it hard for people with disabilities who are sick, mom with a minivan full of kids to drive through and exercise their right to vote. Voting hours are being restricted. The governor likes to go on here saying we're expanding voting hours. Well, that may be in some counties that only were open for 5 or 6 hours. Now they're required to be open for a little bit longer than that. But in counties like Dallas that routinely were open for 12 hours, then they're trying to restrict hours of voting. And then, we found during COVID in the 2020 election, 24-hour voting. We have a lot of people, nurses who work 7 to 7. Well, that's when the polls are up. So we have a lot of frontline healthcare workers who are not able to vote because the polls are not open. We have, workers, policemen, firemen, all kinds of people who work during the day, or families who are having to work and then to do a second job in the evening, or have young kids and they're just not able to vote. And having 24-hour voting from opportunities, it enabled like 10,000 people to be able to vote just in one county alone. And so they're trying to stop that. Why are these provisions, they don't relate to voter fraud at all. Just making it, right. Hours, a time when you can vote has nothing to do with, are you cheating? It has nothing to do with an illegal ballot. It has everything to do with the time of day that you walk into the poll to vote. And so they're just trying to do a lot of these sorts of prescriptive measures in terms of restricting time, restricting access. And then there's the subject of mail-in ballots in terms of all of these protocols that they're trying to put in place. And for a lot of elderly folks who may get confused, and they're trying to make it a criminal offense. If you didn't get the numbers right on your driver's license, and say you are dyslexic and you transpose it or something, it wasn't intentional, but now you're committing voter fraud if this bill passes.
So let's break down some of those provisions one by one, Representative, if you would mind, and thank you for that recitation of what's going on. So, what's just to take a step back myself, what's always been funny is Texans, of all stripes, whether or not you're from Laredo or Lubbock, from El Paso or East Texas, being a Texan is a real thing, right? It is a feeling, it is a spirit. It is one imbued with a sense of individuality, but also a sense of community, right? And so to me, what's most ironic and I think hypocritical about this is someone who, again, worked for Governor George W. Bush when he was a first-term governor, worked for Land Commissioner David Dewhurst and Tony Garza. Back, these are all 20-some years ago now, or even longer for some folks. Was that this is the opposite of allowing the individuals to make their choices. This is legislation by fiat. So let me take the poll watcher piece. So as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, in the original version of this bill during the session, it would have made it actually a crime for the election judge to interfere with poll watchers. Is that still the case? Because certainly that means that the person who's charged with keeping order, making sure that the polling place is frankly boring, like it's supposed to be, and orderly, is now, figuratively has their hands tied behind their backs as goons can come in and do and say whatever it is they want to do 3 times before they're asked to leave. And then, of course, who's going to enforce them leaving?
Right. Yes. It's still criminal penalties. And some of the amendments that the Democrats offered were to reduce those because remember, most election judges in Texas are elderly people, right, who have 3 weeks of their life where they don't have a lot of other obligations of work and kids, who volunteer, who do it for their civic duty, and who are doing the very best they can. And they're not necessarily equipped to deal with a disruptive, Trump-loving poll watcher, for example. Right. Imagine the people who stormed the Capitol are the same people who are volunteering to be poll watchers. What is that 72-year-old little lady going to do?
Right. Well, listen, I'll tell you this. I'd rather have a 72-year-old Texan lady there than many other places, I'll be honest with you. But your point is well taken. Your point is well taken.
Like, what's the saying? We're stronger than a hot brewed cup of tea or something like that.
That's right.
But you're right. Texans, we have a soulful spirit. There's an independence here that we're proud of, that we're known for. And that's a great thing. But having said that, we also have to follow the rules. And we're very concerned about voter intimidation in the polls and the election judges seeming to have diminishing power under this bill to regulate, disruptive, intimidating poll watchers for right, people who are there to cast their legally valid vote. And don't forget, Texas is having a rapid increase of population. We've had almost, I think, 4 million new people here since the 2016 presidential election. Right. And so we have a lot of first-time voters. We have, my district is one of the most diverse districts in the entire state. I have 78 different nationalities in my district, a lot of first-time voters. I had my campaign materials translated into 15 different languages to make it explain how to vote.
I saw that on your website, on your campaign website, how many different ways you could translate the campaign website. I thought that was cool. That was cool.
It's great. We want people to have information, but at the same time, put yourself in their shoes. First time, to maybe to come vote in this country. They're recently citizened, they're naturalized. We do a good job of trying to register new citizens in our state to vote. And then to be in a poll in an election environment where they're being taunted, yelled at, oppressed. There's the new bill doesn't have any sort of distance limitations there that says a poll watcher is entitled to observe all election activity. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean they get to come and stand up right next to you as you fill out your ballot? I mean,
my guess is, Representative, unfortunately, that it probably means something different in North Dallas as it does to South Dallas, right?
That's right. And to those of you watching, North Dallas is a more white, a more affluent part of Dallas County. South Dallas is a more heavily minority neighborhood, lower economic area. And, the polls, we have more polls in North Dallas than they do in South Dallas. Right. It's ridiculous what's already happening. But this poll watcher thing should really just instill the fear of our democracy in each one of us that is listening to this podcast, because it is just so unconscionable to me that our state government that any government agency in this country would do things like this bill to try to restrict the right of vote under the guise of voter protection, of voter integrity, when all it is outright suppression, and it's just wrong.
Representative, why are they doing this?
Because they want to win. You know, Texas is a evolving demographic. Like we said, we're having enormous population shifts. You know, Texas is a great business climate. We are a great state. We don't have a state income tax. It's a good place to live. It's a good place to own your business. I'm a business owner. I've had my own business for 25 years. And so there's a lot of great reasons to be here. And so as a result of that, a lot of new folks are coming in. And like I said, we have folks from other states, folks from other countries, and it's becoming more and more Democratic. The elections used to have a pretty wide Republican swing, and now the margins are getting closer and closer and closer and closer. And they're trying to make it difficult for all these new Democratic voters to vote. And it's just unconscionable to me.
And there's probably, you know, so Governor Greg Abbott is running, I believe, for a third term. He is going to be challenged in the primary by Alan West, now former Republican state chair, former Floridian, doing his best to bring Florida to Texas. And is it Ray Huffines? It's one of the Huffines.
Don Huffines.
Don Huffines.
Yeah.
Another kukula who was at CPAC up in Dallas this weekend, being just as kooky as he could be. This also helps Abbott, and I'm going to ask you a purely political question here. I assume Abbott believes this helps with his right flank as well.
One can only presume that. You know, he's definitely running far to the right. You know, from our vantage point, it's like he's trying to out crazy DeSantis in Florida as to who can be the craziest, rightist Republican out there. And it seems like he's trying to really prepare more for a presidential run than a re-election for governor. I think he's in pretty good shape. He's got $55 million in the bank. He raises a lot of money. It's expensive to get a meeting with him. And, you know, so I don't, I don't think, Don Huffines is just not going to, or West, they're just not going to mount, in my opinion, serious challenges to him. Although, you know, what's an interesting note of all that is that the opponent that I had in my first race when I won this seat was Matt Rinaldi, and he's very conservative, very far in that Tea Party, Freedom Party concept. And I beat him by almost 14 points, but he's the new state Republican Party chair. Yeah,
well, you know, Representative, I want to say thank you, A, for that, and B, he posted a tweet, I think, this morning, just coincidentally enough, that said if someone banned him from licking doorknobs, he would go around licking doorknobs. It gives you a sense of who you replaced in the legislature. So your constituents should be happy that he's no longer there.
Well, he posted that tweet some time ago, but it was actually during COVID in response to restrictions for our own public health and safety to preserve lives. And his response was not, thank you for taking reasonable, measured restrictions to make sure that we all survive and that we all have a comprehensive, sane, rational, thoughtful public health program. His response is to tweet that he'd rather lick a doorknob. So, I mean, his level of judgment is suspect, and I cannot believe that the Republican Party has elected him the new chair. And I think it's great, but we've beaten him once before, and we'll beat him again.
Well, unfortunately, I can believe especially given Alan West is his predecessor, I absolutely can believe they elected him. And of course, now that he's, even if it's an old tweet, it's resurfaced. Central committee meetings will probably start with some sort of ritual doorknob licking, which I can only imagine. So let me talk about a little bit about the different counties. So Texas has 250 some counties, right? 254. 254. I don't know exactly. I'm gonna get this wrong by 10 or 20, but about 200 of those don't have any people in them, or a relatively small number of people. Now, that doesn't mean they shouldn't be represented, of course, but it does mean that if you live in Fort Bend County, it might be quite a hike to vote, right? But there's not going to be a lot of other people at the polling place with you, as opposed to Dallas Tarrant, which is Fort Worth, Bexar County, which is San Antonio, and of course Harris County, which is Houston, the biggest county in the state, as I understand it. So this really takes aim at places that are more population centers, urban centers that tend to be more Democratic, obviously, and suburbs where, although they made up some of their losses last year, a lot of Republicans got wiped out electorally in 2018 when Beto was on the ticket. So just talk to us about the discrepancies between large empty counties and large full counties and what this bill means for it.
Well, the best way I can highlight this is, when Trump was running in 2020, the post office, and they closed all these post offices, right? And they took mail sorting machines out of post offices, and they did all these things to try to create fear of the confidence of the post service. And so the people were like, I want my vote to count. I treasure the right to vote. I have a mail-in ballot, but I'm now nervous about putting it in the U.S. Post Office system. So I would like to drop my ballot off at a ballot drop-off location. I have a valid ballot. I've filled it out. And what's the difference if I just deliver it in person or put it in the U.S. mail? And so Harris County, for example, you're right, has, I think, 5 million people in Harris County. They put drop locations all around the county, and so that it was convenient for people to go and drop their mail-in ballot themselves, turn in their own ballot to the election officers. Well, that was just too easy. So what Greg Abbott did is say, you know what? We think that each county only gets one mail-in ballot location drop-off for the whole county. So we have counties in Texas, like Loving County, that has like 10,000 people on it. So there's one ballot drop-off for their one county of 10,000 people, and one ballot drop-off for Harris County for 5 million people, for Dallas County for 3.5 million people. And that is crazy. And that is, again, part of this new bill. I mean, what is wrong with having valid drop-off locations manned and staffed by the election officials to receive ballots that people have legally cast in their vote by mail and their ballot by mail, because maybe they have an illness, or they're old, or they're recovering from cancer, or they just had a baby and they just want to give them their ballot. They want to vote. But, Greg Abbott doesn't see it that way, because that makes it too easy for people to vote. Republicans don't want to make it easy for people to vote.
Right. And for the folks watching us out there, you have to understand that. First of all, whether or not it's Texas or any state in the U.S. and our nation as a whole, we have a pretty piss poor record on how many people show up to begin with. 67% of Americans turned out for the presidential last year. And the average midterm election, half the voters show up. Right. So it's already a relatively small number of people making the decision for the rest of us that many people, rightfully so, are unhappy about. And as the representative knows, a lot of these campaigns, guys, come down to small numbers. Like Rick Wilson, one of our co-founders, talks about this, that a lot of these races are especially in state-led races or county races, are decided by hundreds, maybe a few thousand votes. A lot of congressional races will be too. And so, guys, what all of this is designed to do is not say, I don't want every person of color not to vote. I just need enough voters of color not to participate. It's increasing that friction for the average individual, for the average Texan, for the average Arkansan, for the average Utah, for the average Californian, whoever it is, to make that difference. I've got my ballot in my hand. If I'm an absentee ballot holder, am I going to drive 45 minutes across town to drop it off? Or am I just going to say, it doesn't matter anyway? And that's what they're counting on, folks. They are counting on enough people, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, to say it's just not worth the trouble. Because once they find out they can't do it, then they get discouraged and they sit at home and they complain and say, well, I guess it didn't matter anyway.
And to highlight that, so, a lot of people were discussing flipping the Texas House last year.
Right.
And a lot of effort was put into that. There's 150 House seats, and the Republicans enjoy a 9-seat advantage. So we needed to flip 9 seats, right? And so out of all the millions and millions, I think in Texas, something like 15 million votes were cast. in the past election. We missed flipping 9 seats by a sum total of 11,500 votes.
Exactly.
Over, some of them were 200, some were 800, some were this. But yeah, 11,500. That's it.
And there's a guy, everybody out named Joe Strauss, who's the former Republican Speaker of the House, who I believe when he took over had like a 3-seat majority. And when they ran him out of town because he wouldn't push the bathroom bill, you know, when that whole thing was going down, I think it was like a 30-seat majority, whatever it is. He had grown it, very business friendly, terrific guy from San Antonio. They said, you're not conservative enough for us. Speaker Strauss steps down. Now they've got, you know, the Republican speakers had their issues last couple of years, but now they're down to 9 seats and a representative, as you said, 11,000 votes across the state, the size of Texas, that, as you note, is probably now it's going to pick up 2 congressional seats, you know, made the difference between, you know, a Democratic House that has to work with a goon like Dan Patrick. No offense. I know you have to be more, you know, politic than I do. And, you know, these voter restrictions, which, you know, are specifically designed to make sure that less Democrats and independents appear at the polls each, you know, March for the primary or November for the general. So, Representative, we've only got a couple of minutes left. What else can you tell our folks before we let you go? Because I know you've got a busy day fighting for democracy up at the Capitol.
Well, I just want everybody out there to know that, you know, House Democrats, we're working really, really hard to preserve our right to vote, to be communicators of the right, to encourage people to vote, to encourage people to regard the right to vote as one of the most precious commodities that we have in our society, and to encourage the federal Congress to pass the Federal Voting Rights Act. We are on the front lines in states here like Texas, and we need national legislation on this issue. It is unbelievable what's happening at the state level to restrict the right to vote, and the federal government needs to come in and say, no, not in this country, not in the United States, not in America are we going to have state governments, local governments, any government restricting any citizen's right to go cast our God-given right to vote. And so that is what we need, and that's what we need everyone to focus on, and you know, help us down here in Texas, because we're working really hard to try to make sure that that happens.
Well, amen. And yeah, like I said, you know, our folks are ready, willing, and able to do what they can. I'm hoping that you're not going to have to spend the rest of your summer in Oklahoma. But if that's what it takes, you know, maybe that's what it'll take. Before we get out of here, everybody, I just want to remind you that we'll have 3 LPTV shows streaming this week, tomorrow night, Wednesday night, and Thursday night, all at 8 p.m. Also, I really encourage you to check out the latest edition of our podcast that dropped late last week with Nicole Perlroth. She's the cyber crime and cyber warfare reporter for the New York Times. It will scare the hell out of you, but was a fascinating discussion. I'm going to have Representative Johnson on the podcast here in a little while. That'll probably drop tomorrow or Wednesday, so I hope you'll tune in for a little bit more in-depth discussion with her. But Representative, until I see you in just a couple hours, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your work. And everybody, we will see you on Friday.
Thank you so much for having me.